This video is going to explain the properties of life and the different levels of living things that exist. I'm going to start with properties of living things. First of all living things are made up of cells. Okay, cells, by definition, you can read it, the smallest unit of a living thing that can be considered still alive. A living thing is called an organism. There's two types of organisms. You can be one cell big, that's all you are. Those are called unicellular organisms. Uni means one, like unicycle. Okay, so examples are bacteria and yeast cells. Then there's multicellular organisms like us. We consist of more than one cell, of course. We consist of millions and millions of cells. In this picture, you see a paramecium. That's not bacteria or yeast. It's a protozoan. We'll talk about that second semester. Then you see a dog. Which one is multicellular? Of course, a dog is made of many, many cells. Paramecium is one cell big. He's unicellular. A second requirement for life is that all living things can reproduce. Reproduce means they can produce new organisms like themselves. Like your parents reproduce to form you. You are like your parents in that you're a human being like both of your parents are. There's two types of reproductions. Sexual reproduction. That's where you have two different sexes. The female forms an egg. There's a symbol for female. And the male forms a sex cell called a sperm. Again, that's the symbol for a male. Okay, and the sperm and egg unite. So, when you have sexual reproduction, the offspring are different from the parents. Like, you're not exactly like your mom or your dad. You're a mixture. You're a variety of your parents. Whereas asexual reproduction produces genetically identical clones of the parents, meaning that the child produced is an identical twin of the parent. So, of course, we don't do that, but yeast and bacteria and many protozoans do that, as can plants. Okay, all living things have genetic material. And again, genetic material contains all the chemical codes for the traits that make you up. My height, my eye color, my hair texture, my talents, anything that makes you you, that's a trait, and it's all coded for in the genetic material. And the genetic material we should know right now is called DNA. Much more on that later. So, when you have sexual reproduction, the offspring have totally different mix. They have a mixture of DNA of both their parents. Whereas when you have asexual reproduction, the offspring or the children are genetically identical. They have the exact same DNA as the parent, identical. Okay, so this third property of life is that all living things share the same universal genetic code. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, every living thing has its genetic material in the form of a molecule called DNA. And the traits that we have are coded for in the DNA molecule. So think of DNA as a blueprint for all the traits that we consist of. A blueprint. The way the blueprint is read inside each of our cells, the way the blueprint is decoded into the proteins that make up our trait. Make up all our traits is very similar, is almost identical in any kind of life form, whether it's a bacteria or a human being. Here we see some models of DNA, and we'll talk about much more of this later. DNA is a molecule. It's made up of different atoms organized in a certain way. So we'll talk about that later. Okay, another physical property of living things is that all living things grow. Okay, when I say grow, I mean their cells divide asexually to produce a bigger organism. So I'll say by cell division. Later we'll call that mitosis. So all living things grow by making more cells by cell division. Okay, living things also develop. Development means cells will differentiate to perform specific things. So we got these undifferentiated cells becoming more specialized. Like the cells will become, there's all kinds of different cells, muscle, muscle, nerve, skin, bone, cartilage, on and on, where these cells can do a specific thing that other cells cannot do. So that's what, when we develop from an embryo, these generic cells, undeveloped cells, first divide, and then those cells specialize, they differentiate into specialized cells that can do specific things that other cells can't do. Okay, so in this picture we have an egg that a sperm has entered. Those two nuclei fuse. This is sexual reproduction right here. And it forms a fertilized egg called a zygote. Okay, so we have the egg, we got the sperm, and then those cells do cell division. This is called the embryo. After the zygote starts cell dividing, which is immediately. So embryo continues on and on. About this stage, cell specialization is starting to occur. An embryo is called a fetus about 5 weeks after fertilization. The fifth property of living things is that they must have a constant input of energy in order to do all the work a cell has to do. Without energy, it's like pulling a plug on your computer, taking the battery out of your iPhone. But also, living things also require material, matter. A living thing is constantly growing, constantly replacing cells that have died with new cells, and that takes material from the surroundings. When I say material, matter, I'm talking about atoms and molecules. So all living things need energy input and material, molecules, atoms to build their cells and molecules from. Okay, here's a term that you should get used to right now. All living things have a metabolism, and that's all the chemical reactions that are occurring in their cells or their body. Okay, the total sum of all the chemical reactions. Chemical reactions require material, matter, atoms, molecules, and energy. The energy is stored in the bonds in the molecules. Chemical energy. Okay, there's two major kinds of metabolisms, general metabolisms. The kind that makes its own food, photosynthesis. Here's a picture on the right. Photosynthesis is what plants and algae and some bacteria do. Right here. It takes carbon dioxide and water from the surroundings, the matter. It uses sunlight energy from the sun, and it makes organic food molecules, glucose, and expels a waste product, oxygen gas. So, waste product of plants doing photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is making glucose from carbon dioxide and water and releasing oxygen as a waste product. That's photosynthesis. Metabolism that plants use. We can't do photosynthesis. Okay, respiration.
Someone is at the front door.
The other major metabolism that organisms do, living things do, is respiration. Respiration is basically just the reverse of photosynthesis. You can see that I did that in green up here. Okay, so we take the glucose and we use oxygen that the plants release to the atmosphere. We eat the glucose that they make, and we make energy. We get the energy from the glucose when we break it down back into CO2, carbon dioxide, and H2O, water. We put that energy into ATP, which is the energy molecule that can be spent anywhere. Energy is needed in our cells. Okay, so plants also have to, of course, do respiration in order to get the energy from the glucose that they make. But we animals and fungi and non photosynthetic organisms can only do respiration. They can't do photosynthesis. Okay, so that's two types of metabolism that you should distinguish. You should know this equation, the direction, one direction being photosynthesis, other direction being respiration. Another property of any living thing is that they respond to their environment. So, what is responding? Responding is reacting. For example, in this picture, we see this lady's pupil, the little hole opening for the light in your eyeball. It's nice and big when it's dark, but if you flash a light on her eye, it shrinks because the muscles in her eye are reacting to that sudden flash of light. The stimulus, okay? The stimulus is the thing you're reacting to. That's the light. And the response is how the organism responds to the stimulus. So in this case, the response is the pupil getting smaller. So you should know the difference between a response and a stimulus. Stimulus is the environmental factor, and when the organism reacts to the stimulus, that's called the response. It's important that an organism can react to its environment for survival, to find its food, to find its mate, to escape from predators. A seventh property of living things, and you don't have to know them by numbers, is that all living things maintain a stable internal environment. Okay, you have to, in your cells, maintain, it's like a thermostat. You have to have it at a certain level to survive. The temperature, the pH, the amount of oxygen, the amount of whatever. Okay, if you cannot maintain a stable internal environment, you're no different than a non-living object. You'll be dead. Okay, this ability to keep conditions inside the body or cell as constant as possible is called homeostasis. Okay, very important. Example, we sweat to release heat. If the heat were to be kept in our bodies or in the cell, this would damage the proteins that are doing the work to keep the cell alive. So we need to have a mechanism that releases it. Think of when you're thirsty, your body craves water. Then after we get the water, hormones are released that makes us not overdrink the water. Same thing with blood sugar. If we get hungry, hormones are given off to break down stored fat and glycogen, which is a stored starch in our cells, to make sugar in between meals. And when we're eating, same kind of hormones tell us that take away the craving for food and we stop eating. Okay, so these are all homeostasis events. They're all there to keep a balance so that we don't overdo or underdo some chemical reaction that keeps us alive. Much like a thermostat controls the climate of your home. Okay, so another property of living things is that they evolve. Evolving means over many generations, the types of organisms in a group will evolve or change different. They'll get different traits than they had in the past. Now, this is over many generations. The forms that they evolve into have new traits that allow them to better adapt. Okay, so why? Because over long periods of time, the environment is obviously going to geographically and climatically change so that the traits that worked in the past won't be as adaptive as the traits that will work in the future or the present time after the environment has changed. This will allow the animal to get food easier, to protect itself better from predators, and to leave more offspring. If you look at this picture right here, this shows, let's see, millions of years ago, 55 million years ago, the horse was this little rat-like thing, very small. The ancestor of the horse, I should say, was very small like that, low to the ground. And then over time, we can tell from the fossil record that evolved into a larger and larger animal, depending on the environment that it found itself in, and it became better at running and traveling long distances to find food as the climate changed to drier climates. We just finished the summary of all the properties that a living thing is characterized by in order to be alive. Now we're going to talk about the different levels of biological organization. We're going to start from the most general level, the highest level, to the smallest level, the most specialized level. The most general level of living things, the highest, most general level is the biosphere. Okay, so the biosphere is all the physical things and all the living things that live in or around those physical things. So basically, it's the whole planet Earth. All the physical rocks, atmosphere, water, nutrients, fertilizer, whatever, and all the living things living in or around that stuff. That's called the biosphere. So basically, it's our whole planet Earth and all living things on it, in it. Okay, we can break up the biosphere into the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, which is the water, salt or fresh, and the lithosphere, which is the land. But it's not just the water, the land, and the gases in the air. It's also living things that live there. Okay, the biosphere can be subdivided into all kinds of ecosystems. Okay, ecosystems are like the biosphere, but it's a particular region in the biosphere containing the living things and the non-living things. For example, a pond is an ecosystem. A field is an ecosystem. A forest is an ecosystem. A desert is. You've heard of biomes? Biomes are types of ecosystems, if you want, like a tundra, a chaparral, a coniferous forest. Okay, so there are subdivisions of the biosphere based on different climates and geographical areas. Now, ecosystem or biosphere has two components: the biotic components, or the living things, and the abiotic components, or the non-living things. Okay, so water would be abiotic, starfish would be biotic, the nutrients, the fertilizer in the soil is abiotic. The worms that live in the soil, biotic. The biotic parts of an ecosystem, the living parts, the biotic parts of the ecosystem, is called the community. It consists of all the different types of animals and plants and bacteria and fungi, everything that's living in that particular ecosystem. So don't get ecosystem and community mixed up. Community is part of the ecosystem, the living part of the ecosystem. Population. Population is the part of the community that are the same type, in the same species. That means that they can interbreed with one another and produce offspring. So think of a pond out there. There's populations of alligator. There's a population of ducks. There's a population of snake birds. There's a population of toads. There's a population of dragonflies. There's a population of grass. There's a population of algae. I can go on and on. But all the different populations make up the community in an ecosystem. Okay, so a population consists of organisms that can interbreed and produce offspring. So organisms are individual living things. It could be unicellular or multicellular depending on the type of population. Okay, at least a multicellular organism, if it's advanced enough, has organ systems. And organ system is different organs, which I haven't defined, acting together to carry out a particular body function. So we got the circulatory system, we have the heart, we have arteries. Well, there's only one organ in the circulatory system. The nervous system has the brain, it has the spinal cord, then it has the nerves coming off the spinal cord to the rest of the body. The respiratory system has the all the mouth and nose and throat parts leading to the lungs. Okay, digestive system, of course, is the teeth, the mouth, salivary glands, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and of course, all kinds of other organs that secrete enzymes that help break down the food, the liver, gallbladder. Then we got the skeletal system, all the bones. Those are organs. Each bone is a living thing. And then we got the muscular system, all the muscles in the body that allow the bones to move. All these work together, these different systems. Of course, the organ systems are composed of organs. Organs are groups of tissues that have a specialized function. And here's just a few examples of organs. There's many other organs. Okay? So there's cells that have become specialized, and they're living together and doing a very specific list of things that other cells can't do. Okay, so like I said before, organ consists of tissues. Tissues are composed of cells that have differentiated in similar ways so that they can all perform a very specific function. Connective tissue would be like bone or cartilage. Epithelial tissue would be like skin. Muscle tissue contracts when told to by nerves, nervous tissue. All these cells are differentiated to do a specific, and they're collected into organs, or they're spread out everywhere. Okay, so we already talked about cells. Cells are what tissues are made of, but cells are the smallest entity that can be considered to be alive. Okay, so cells are consisting of subunits or organelles. They're not. Okay, these are made of molecules. They're not made of cells. Organelle is inside a cell. All these number things in this really good picture on the right, all these number things are different kinds of organs in a cell. They're not organs because they're not made of cells, but they act like organs. They're called organelles, like miniature organs. Okay, so they each have a specific function, and we're not gonna, you probably learned most of those in grade school, what their functions are, but we'll do that later. Okay, at this point, starting with organelles, these are not living. Organelles are part of a living cell. A cell could not exist without its organelles, but organelles are not living units. Okay, starting with organelles and going to the end of this study guide. Everything is not living. Okay, but without it, you couldn't exist as a living cell. So of course, everything is made out of molecules. Molecules consist of chemically bonded atoms. So each of these balls represents atoms. Right there is the chemical bond. Okay, we'll talk about this in a little detail next unit. So we got water, 2 hydrogens bonded to 1 oxygen. We got carbon dioxide, 1 carbon bonded to 2 oxygens. And we got oxygen gas, two oxygen atoms bonded together. Just for example. Now, each of those balls in the other picture is considered an atom. Okay. There's about 115 different kind of atoms in our world, 120 or something. Each of those different types is called an element. So, like we had carbon element, oxygen element, nitrogen element, but each of those elements consists of a specific kind of atom. We'll talk about here's the nucleus of an atom, consisting of protons and neutrons, and then flying outside are negative particles called electrons. Okay, so the nucleus consists of protons and neutrons. Neutrons are neutral. There's no charge for a neutron. But the protons are positively charged. Nucleus, not to be confused with the cell nucleus. Nucleus of the atomic nucleus, or the nucleus of an atom, consists of protons and neutrons smushed together. Then outside, far away, are orbiting electrons, which are, negatively charged. So this picture is showing that atoms combine together to form molecules, which are groups of atoms, and the molecules can form to make these biologically huge molecules called macromolecules, like DNA. Macro means large. And the molecules form the organelles, and then the organelles get together with other molecules to form a cell, etc. Then the cells form tissue, and tissues form organs. The organ systems are formed from organs, and then the organism consists of its organ systems. Then all the organisms of the same type are in a population of the organisms of the same type living in an area or in a population, and populations of different species, like these two kinds of birds, the population of this bird and the population of this bird, population of all the different species living in an area is called a community. Okay, so species is a type that can interbreed. So one population is one species of organisms. Okay, so the different populations or all the different species are what we call a community. That includes remember that the community does not include the abiotic parts of the place it lives. The community is only the biotic parts. Now, the biotic plus the abiotic parts is called the ecosystem of a certain region. And all the ecosystems add up to be what we call the biosphere. Okay, so which defined as the biotic part of an ecosystem. We just talked about this community. which the founders find is a group of individuals of a particular type species lives in the same area. Okay, that's the population.